Zoom into a map of California and start with the shape. A long diagonal sliver running 770 miles down the Pacific coast, barely 250 miles wide at its thickest point. Zoom into the eastern edge of that sliver and you'll find 2 points sitting 85 miles apart. One of the highest ground in the contiguous United States. The other, the lowest point on the entire continent. A basin nearly 300 feet below sea level, where the air gets hot enough to kill a person in hours. Zoom along the length of the coast and there's a scar running underneath nearly the whole state. A fault line where 2 tectonic plates have been grinding past each other for millions of years. Now, more overdue for a major rupture than at any point in California's recorded history. This isn't just a state. On a map, California looks like a warning label. Here's what the geography is actually telling you. Start with the outline itself. California runs 770 miles from its northern border with Oregon to its southern border with Mexico, but averages barely 250 miles wide. A thinner profile than most people picture, covering 163,000 square miles as a long diagonal strip running northwest to southeast along the Pacific, making it the 3rd largest state in the country by area despite the narrow shape. The northern border is a surveyed line at 42 degrees latitude. The eastern border with Nevada and Arizona is partly the Colorado River, partly surveyed meridians. The southern border dips down to meet Mexico at San Diego. The western border is the Pacific Ocean itself, 840 miles of coastline, making California the only state in the continental US whose entire western boundary is the literal edge of the continent. The coastline isn't just an edge on a map. It moderates temperature, produces fog, drives rainfall patterns, and physically separates California from Asia. Los Angeles and Tokyo sit at almost the same latitude. The Pacific is the reason one is a desert and the other isn't. Now look at what's inside that outline. The Sierra Nevada runs 400 miles along California's eastern spine, a massive granite wall rising past 14,000 feet that acts as a barrier between the state's populated coast and the desert interior. Mount Whitney, at 14,505 feet, is the highest point in the contiguous United States, and it sits inside this range. 85 miles to the west sits Death Valley. Its floor, the Badwater Basin, 282 feet below sea level, the lowest point in North America, and also the hottest place on Earth, where air temperature has reached 134 degrees Fahrenheit. 85 miles, from alpine conditions where snow persists year-round, to a basin where summer heat will kill an unprepared person in hours. No other place in the contiguous US packs that range of extremes in that short a distance, and the geography alone tells you what kind of place this is. Between the Sierra Nevada and the Coast Ranges to the west lies the Central Valley, 450 miles long, up to 60 miles wide, so flat and fertile it produces more food than most countries on Earth. A third of the vegetables eaten in the United States grow in this single valley, along with 2/3 of the nation's fruit and nuts, making it one of the most productive agricultural regions in the history of human civilization. It runs almost entirely on snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada, funneled through a water infrastructure so vast and complicated, it's been called the most ambitious engineering project in American history. That same compressed geography stacks ecosystems on top of each other in a way almost no other state can match. Redwood forest along the northern coast hold some of the tallest living organisms on Earth. Trees that were already centuries old when Rome fell. Drive a few hours south and east and you're in Mojave Desert scrubland. Drive toward the coast and you're in Mediterranean chaparral. one of only 5 places on the planet with that specific climate. Offshore, the coastline drops into some of the deepest submarine canyons on the west coast, carved by the same tectonic forces still active underground. All of it exists within a state you could drive across, north to south, in a single day if the traffic allowed it, which, this being California, it usually does not. Running roughly parallel to the coast for the length of the state is the San Andreas Fault, 800 miles of seismic tension where the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate grind past each other at about 2 inches a year. That grinding is the same force that built the Coast Ranges and periodically yanks the ground sideways in places like Point Reyes, which physically moved 20 feet in a matter of seconds during the 1906 earthquake that leveled San Francisco. The fault isn't a line on a map, it's a scar. In some places, you can stand inside it. A visible trench running through the landscape where something is clearly wrong with the Earth. The last major rupture on the fault's southern segment was in 1857. Geologists put the return period for a major quake on that segment at 140 to 160 years. It's now been 168. In the language of seismologists, the fault is overdue. When it goes, and the consensus among scientists is not if, but when, the damage won't stop at collapsed buildings. Los Angeles gets most of its water through a 233-mile aqueduct, running from the Owens Valley in the north, snaking through mountain tunnels and open canals across some of the harshest terrain in the state. And that aqueduct crosses the San Andreas through a tunnel called the Elizabeth Tunnel. Engineers have modeled what a magnitude 7.8 quake on that segment does to it. The tunnel splits 10 feet in each direction, trapping the water behind rock. Los Angeles loses its primary water supply, with repairs potentially taking months. That's the time bomb sitting under the most populous county in the country. To understand why any of this matters, you have to go back before the geography got a name on a map at all. And the beginning isn't 1849 or 1848, or the gold rush at all. Before the Spanish arrived, this landscape held the highest density of indigenous population anywhere in North America, north of Mexico. Roughly 300,000 people spread across hundreds of distinct tribes speaking an estimated 135 different languages and dialects. Fishing the same coastline, working the same Central Valley soil, and living in the shadow of the same Sierra Nevada wall you just traced on the map. These were not primitive societies. They were sophisticated managers of an extraordinarily rich landscape, maintaining food sources, running trade networks, and developing cultural traditions across thousands of years on this same ground. Then the Spanish came and started building missions along the same coastline, each one placed roughly a day's walk from the next, forming a chain that eventually ran nearly 600 miles from San Diego to north of San Francisco. The mission system began in 1769 when Father Junipero Serra founded the first California mission at San Diego. By 1823, 21 missions lined the coast. The official purpose was religious conversion. The practical reality was that native Californians were recruited, often by force, into a labor system that closely resembled slavery. They built the missions, farmed the land, were forbidden from leaving, and died in staggering numbers from European diseases they had no immunity to. About 100,000 indigenous people, roughly a third of California's pre-contact native population, died in a desperate consequence of the mission system. The California Indian Heritage Commission doesn't use softer language for it. Then came the gold rush, and what remained of that population was subjected to something the state government itself would eventually call attempted genocide. In 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall spotted gold glinting in the water at Sutter's Mill on the American River. in the Sierra Nevada foothills on the morning of January 24th. He told his employer, John Sutter, to keep it quiet. It didn't stay quiet. Within weeks, it was the worst kept secret in California. By summer, it had reached the East Coast, and by 1849, it had spread around the world. California's non-native population went from roughly 14,000 people to 300,000 in 7 years, in the most stunning demographic explosion in American history, arriving from every direction and every continent, from the eastern United States, Mexico, Chile, China, Australia, the Hawaiian Islands. They came in ships around Cape Horn, walked across deserts, crossed the Isthmus of Panama, died on every route, and came anyway into a landscape with no legal framework, no established government, and no rules about what could be done to the people already living there. What they found was not just gold. It was a society being assembled in real time on top of a landscape that had already supported people for thousands of years. What followed was systematic. California's first governor, Peter Burnett, told the state legislature in January 1851 that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct. The governor of a U.S. state, 1 year after statehood, announcing genocide as official state business. The state government paid bounties for the scalps of Native men, women, and children. Private militias carried out raids that historians have documented as massacres. Miners dumped nearly 76,000 tons of mercury into the rivers to separate gold from ore, poisoning the same waterways indigenous communities depended on for food and survival. An estimated 150,000 Native people lived in California in 1848. By 1870, roughly 30,000 remained. An 80% collapse in a single generation, driven by policy and violence, not disease alone. In 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom became the first California governor to formally use the word genocide, 168 years after Burnett's speech. Before any of that, on a stretch of land near Sonoma, there was the Bear Flag Revolt, and it lasted exactly 25 days. In June 1846, a group of American settlers in Northern California, restless, armed, and aware that war between the United States and Mexico was likely, decided not to wait. They rode to the Mexican garrison at Sonoma, arrested the commanding general without violence, and raised a flag they'd made themselves. A grizzly bear and a red star painted on cloth, with the words California Republic written beneath. The Bear Flag Republic had no currency, no formal government, and approximately 200 citizens. It folded into U.S. military control just 25 days later, in July 1846, when naval forces arrived and raised the American flag over the same garrison. The flag itself survived. California's state flag today is almost identical to the original. The grizzly bear on it represented an animal that was native to the state at the time and considered a symbol of wildness and strength. The last confirmed California grizzly was shot in 1922. There's been no confirmed sighting since 1924. The bear on the flag has been extinct within the state for over 100 years. The gold rush that reshaped this landscape mostly bypassed the people who started it. John Sutter, on whose land the gold was found, went bankrupt as his workers abandoned him the moment the news spread. His cattle were slaughtered by squatters, and his land was overrun. He spent years in legal battles trying to reclaim it and died in poverty. James Marshall, who found the gold, never successfully mined it. Miners jumped his claims, and he died poor too. The fortunes went to the people who sold things to miners. Levi Strauss and denim pants, Henry Wells and William Fargo's banking and express delivery, the merchants, hoteliers, landowners, and railroad builders. Collis Huntington, Leland Stanford, Charles Crocker, and Mark Hopkins, the four men who built the Central Pacific Railroad through the Sierra Nevada in the 1860s, became the wealthiest men in California on the back of that same gold rush economy, using 10,000 Chinese laborers paid less than white workers and left out of the gold spike ceremony entirely when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. Those four men's names are still on universities, hotels, and streets across the state. California's 1850 statehood application, entering the Union as a free state on this same contested ground squeezed between ocean and desert, became the first major test of the Compromise of 1850, the last-ditch attempt to hold the Union together over slavery, forcing concessions, including the Fugitive Slave Act, which required northern states to return escaped enslaved people to their owners. California entering as a free state didn't prevent the Civil War. It delayed it 11 years and made it worse when it came. Now to the story of how Los Angeles claimed the water for the basin it sits in. One of the most audacious acts of institutional theft in American history, carried out by a man still celebrated as a hero in the city he took it from. In 1904, Los Angeles held about 200,000 people in a semi-arid basin getting barely 15 inches of rain a year. Its river insufficient to support any further growth, the city running dry. William Mulholland, superintendent of the city's water department, traveled 233 miles north to the Owens Valley, a fertile region fed by Sierra Nevada snowmelt, and saw exactly what he needed: an entire river's worth of water that could theoretically flow to Los Angeles by gravity alone. What followed was described by one historian as chicanery, subterfuge, and a strategy of lies. Mulholland and former Los Angeles Mayor Fred Eaton worked with a federal engineer named Joseph Lippincott, simultaneously on the federal payroll and secretly advising Los Angeles to acquire Owens Valley water rights under false pretenses. The federal government had been planning an irrigation project for local farmers. Eden posed as a rancher, buying land while those same farmers believed the federal project was still coming. It wasn't. His purchases were for Los Angeles. Meanwhile, before any public announcement, a group of Los Angeles businessmen quietly bought 16,200 acres in the San Fernando Valley at $30 an acre. Once the aqueduct arrived and water reached the valley, that land jumped to $300 an acre. The insider deals were eventually exposed, and nobody went to prison. The aqueduct was completed in 1913. At the dedication, Mulholland opened the gates in front of 40,000 people as the water rushed in, and said, with theatrical simplicity, "There it is. Take it." Los Angeles took it. Within 2 decades, the city's population crossed 1 million, while the Owens Valley dried up. By the early 1920s, so much water had been diverted that agriculture in the valley was failing. The lake at its southern end had begun shrinking and dying, and farmers who'd been promised irrigation instead watched their fields turn to dust. In the early hours of May 21, 1924, 40 men drove out to a section of the aqueduct near the town of Lone Pine with 500 pounds of dynamite and blew it open, sending millions of gallons pouring across the desert floor. The opening shot in what became known as the California Water Wars. The mayor of Los Angeles offered a $10,000 reward for the perpetrators. Armed guards were stationed the full length of the aqueduct. The Owens Valley bombers were celebrated as folk heroes across the country anyway. 11 separate attacks followed between 1924 and 1931. Los Angeles won regardless. By the end of 1926, it owned 90% of the land and water rights in the valley, and the farming economy there collapsed for good, leaving behind what the valley still is today: arid, largely depopulated, a place of stunning geological beauty carrying a wound that's never fully closed. Today, Owens Lake is a dry, cracked salt flat and one of the largest single sources of dust pollution in the United States. Los Angeles has spent over $1 billion trying to remediate a dust problem it created by draining a lake it emptied back in 1913. And here's the detail that ties this whole landscape back to the fault line running underneath it. The same aqueduct still carries Owens Valley water to Los Angeles across the San Andreas, through the same tunnel, a vulnerability the city has known about since at least 2014. The city has alternative storage. It may last a few months. The water stolen from the Owens Valley to build Los Angeles may ultimately be cut off by the very fault that runs under Los Angeles. A city built on a geological time bomb, fed by water taken through deception, waiting on a clock neither the city nor the fault has agreed to stop. There's one more chapter in this same landscape's history that gets skipped, running from the gold rush to an executive order signed in 1942. Chinese immigrants came to California during the gold rush by the tens of thousands. They worked the mines, built the railroads through the Sierra Nevada, drained the swamps of the Sacramento Delta to create farmland, and made themselves indispensable to California's economy, while facing systemic legal discrimination from the moment they arrived. California passed a foreign miners tax in 1850. Applied selectively to Chinese miners, they were barred from testifying in court against white citizens and excluded from public schools. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, the only law in American history to bar immigration based on a single nationality. It was supposed to last 10 years. It lasted 61. Unrepealed until 1943, when China became a U.S. ally against Japan and the optics became untenable. The Japanese American community in California had a different kind of reckoning, and it came faster. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. On February 19, 1942, less than 3 months later, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the forced removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. In California, roughly 120,000 people of Japanese descent, the majority of them American citizens born in the United States, were given days to dispose of their property and businesses and report to assembly centers, then sent to internment camps in remote areas of California, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Arkansas. One of those camps, Manzanar, sat directly inside the Owens Valley, on the same drained, dust-choked land Los Angeles had already stripped of its water 2 decades earlier. The same valley some of the men who dynamited the aqueduct in 1924 called home, now fenced, guarded, and used to imprison more than 10,000 American citizens whose only offense was their ancestry. They had committed no crimes. There was no evidence of espionage or sabotage. The Supreme Court upheld the internment in 1944 in a case called Korematsu v. United States, ruling that military necessity justified the forced relation of an entire ethnic group. That ruling wasn't formally overturned until 2018, 74 years for the Supreme Court to acknowledge what it had done. In 1988, the Civil Liberties Act formally apologized to surviving internees and provided $20,000 in reparations to each. By that point, many of those interned had already died, and the farms and businesses lost in 1942 were never returned. Now, look at what this same landscape built once the violence had run its course. The gold rush didn't produce lasting wealth for most miners. It produced California. And California, once it existed as a real economy rather than a frontier territory, became the engine of American innovation for the next 175 years. Filmmakers came to California in the early 1900s, chasing weather. 320 sunny days a year in Los Angeles meant outdoor filming was possible year-round, and by the 1920s, Hollywood was the center of the global film industry. It still is. The industry employs over 680,000 people in California alone and generates over $43 billion a year. Numbers that don't even include streaming, also largely based here. Netflix launched in California. Disney was founded in California. Most of what the world watches was made here. Then came Silicon Valley. In the 1950s and 60s, Stanford's engineering dean, Frederick Terman, began encouraging faculty and graduates to start companies near campus instead of taking jobs back east, turning the orchards 50 miles south of the same fog-based coastline you start this story on into what would eventually be called Silicon Valley. The result was Hewlett-Packard, Fairchild Semiconductor, and Intel. From Intel came integrated circuit. From the integrated circuit came the personal computer. From Stanford itself came two graduate students named Larry Page and Sergey Brin, who founded Google. Apple was founded in a garage in Cupertino in 1976. The first internet message ever sent, the predecessor to every email, text, and social media post in human history, was transmitted from UCLA to Stanford in 1969. California to California. Silicon Valley today controls roughly a third of all venture capital investments in the United States. Apple, Alphabet, Meta, and Nvidia, four of the most valuable companies in the history of human commerce, are headquarters within 50 miles of each other in the San Francisco Bay Area. Their combined market capitalization exceeding the GDP of most countries on Earth. And then there's agriculture. The Central Valley produces more food than most nations. California grows 80% of the world's almonds and more than 90% of US-grown strawberries, walnuts, pistachios, and artichokes. The Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach together form the busiest port complex in the Western Hemisphere, handling about 40% of all goods imported into the United States. California's GDP in 2024 was over $4 trillion. The second largest state economy is Texas at roughly $2 trillion. California's economy is literally twice the size of its nearest competitor within the same country. If California were a country, it would rank fourth in the world behind Germany and ahead of Japan. That's not a metaphor or a boast. It's arithmetic, and it comes from a state whose name is from a work of fiction, whose fundamental industry began with a discovery its founders tried to keep secret, and whose largest city was built on water that was taken through fraud and held through violence. Come back to the map one last time. That long diagonal strip along the Pacific coast, the Sierra Nevada wall running its spine, the Central Valley producing food for a nation, the San Andreas Fault cutting through underneath all of it like a scar that hasn't finished moving. Redwoods older than Rome on one end of the state, salt flats hot enough to kill on the other, separated by a drive you could finish in an afternoon. The lowest point in North America and the highest point in the contiguous United States, 85 miles apart. A grizzly bear on the state flag that's been extinct within the state for 100 years. A name pulled from a 16th century Spanish fantasy novel. describing a fictional island ruled by a queen named Calafia. California was imagined before it was mapped, and conquered before it was understood. It was built on gold that ran out, water that was stolen, labor that was exploited, and innovation that the rest of the world still hasn't caught up to. All of it sitting on terrain that is still, quietly moving underneath everything standing on top of it. The most powerful state in the most powerful country on Earth is sitting on a fault that's overdue, watered by an aqueduct that crosses that same fault through a single tunnel. Eureka! That's what miners are said to have shouted when they found gold here. It's an ancient Greek word. It means, "I have found it." The question this stretch of coastline has been trying to answer ever since is exactly what it found, and whether it's going to be able to hold on to it.